The biting wind of late autumn in downtown Chicago was a relentless sculptor, carving red lines on Sarah's exposed skin and tugging at the thin, frayed edges of her oversized coat. The city lights, a dazzling testament to ambition and prosperity, seemed only to amplify the darkness that clung to her like a second skin. Each towering skyscraper, with its sterile, illuminated offices, felt like a mocking monument to a life she once had, a life now as distant and mythical as a forgotten dream. Her son, 6-year-old Leo, shivered beside her, his small hand clutching hers with a grip that was both desperate and trusting. His innocent eyes, usually bright with childish curiosity, were shadowed by a hunger that gnawed at Sarah's soul more fiercely than any cold. They had been walking for hours, a directionless drift through the urban labyrinth, their only goal the faint hope of warmth, a discarded morsel, anything to stave off the gnawing emptiness. The shelter was full, a common refrain in their brutal existence, leaving them to the mercy of the unforgiving streets. Sarah pulled Leo closer, burying his head against her hip, feeling the fragile beat of his heart against her own. "Almost there, sweetie," she murmured, a lie she told herself more than him, a prayer whispered into the indifferent wind. Just a little further. Their usual spot, a secluded bench near a rarely used alley behind a cluster of high-end restaurants, offered a meager shield from the wind, but tonight even that felt inadequate. The air was thick with the rich, tempting aroma of roasted meats, expensive spices and freshly baked bread, a cruel symphony of scents that danced around them, an invisible wall separating their reality from the opulence within. Sarah's stomach clenched, but her gaze was fixed on the back entrance of the Gilded Fork, a restaurant famous for its extravagant prices and clientele. She knew from past desperate observations that they often threw out perfectly good food at closing time. It was a gamble, a humiliating wait, but it was often their only hope. Leo, despite his young age, understood the ritual. He didn't complain, didn't ask, "Why can't we go inside?" He simply leaned into his mother, his small body trembling, his silence a heavier burden than any plea. Sarah smoothed his messy blonde hair, matted from days without a proper wash, her fingers brushing against the coldness of his scalp. She imagined a warm bath, a soft bed, a hot meal, simple comforts that felt like the pinnacle of luxury. Guilt gnawed at her, a constant companion. She was a mother, and she was failing. Every day was a testament to that failure, a relentless erosion of her spirit. Around 9 p.m., the first signs of activity at the back door began. A chef, his white apron pristine despite a long shift, emerged to toss out a bag of what looked like day-old pastries. Sarah's heart leaped, but before she could move, another figure, a cleaner, quickly swept them into a larger bin. Her shoulders slumped. It was a constant dance, a race against the clock and the vigilant staff who aimed to keep their prestigious establishment free of such unsightly scenes. Then a new scent wafted out, something incredibly savory, undeniably fresh. The back door opened again and a busboy, barely older than a teenager, wheeled out a cart laden with half-eaten plates, silver covers gleaming under the alley light. He emptied them one by one into a large industrial waste bin. Sarah watched, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes scanning each plate, searching for anything salvageable. A half-eaten steak, some untouched roasted vegetables, a slice of cake, the discarded remnants of lives overflowing with abundance. Her gaze fell upon a plate with a substantial portion of a prime rib, barely touched, alongside roasted potatoes and glistening asparagus. It was a feast, a veritable banquet in their world. Her stomach rumbled ferociously, but it was Leo's vacant stare fixed on that plate that propelled her forward. She took a deep, shaky breath, her dignity, what little remained, warring with the fierce instinct to protect her child. This wasn't for her. It was for Leo. She released Leo's hand, instructing him to stay put, her voice barely a whisper. With hesitant steps, she approached the busboy, who was now wiping down the cart, oblivious to her presence. The cold air seemed to magnify the sound of her own ragged breathing. Her palms were sweating despite the chill. This was it. The moment of complete surrender, the ultimate plea for charity. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was a fragile tremor, almost lost in the urban cacophony of distant sirens and rumbling elevated trains. The busboy, startled, turned, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her disheveled appearance. Sarah felt a flush of shame crawl up her neck, but she pushed it down. "Leo." "Sir, can I take your leftovers for my child?" she asked, her voice cracking on the last word, her eyes fixed on that half-eaten plate of prime rib, a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. Her gaze, however, flickered past the busboy, past the alley entrance, towards the main thoroughfare. Unknown to her, walking out of the front entrance of the Gilded Fork, his mind still replaying the high-stakes negotiation he had just concluded, was Robert Maxwell, a man who epitomized success. A chief financial officer for a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate, he was accustomed to making decisions that impacted thousands. Tonight, he felt a rare sense of contentment, a successful deal sealed with an expensive dinner. He was about to hail his waiting car when a fleeting glimpse of movement in the alley caught his eye. It was nothing specific, just a blur, but something about the posture of the woman, the desperate plea in her voice that carried even to his distant ears, made him pause. He was about to dismiss it as just another unfortunate street scene, a common sight in this city of extremes, but something, an almost imperceptible tug, made him hesitate, made him turn, made him truly look. His world of balance sheets and market projections was about to collide with a raw reality he had only ever seen from the comfortable distance of a tinted car window. Robert Maxwell was a man whose life was meticulously ordered. His suits were tailored, his schedule was planned to the minute, and his emotions were compartmentalized with the precision of a Swiss watch. Empathy, while not entirely absent, was a theoretical concept, often viewed through the lens of corporate social responsibility reports rather than direct, visceral experience. He'd contributed to charities, of course, signed off on substantial donations, but the raw, unvarnished face of poverty was something he usually encountered through news headlines or the brief, uncomfortable glance out of a speeding taxi window. Tonight, however, was different. The woman's voice, a thin, reedy sound, carried an unusual resonance. "Sir, can I take your leftovers for my child?" The words, so simple, yet so laden with humiliation and desperation, pierced through the usual urban din. He was about to step into his waiting car, the door held open by his driver, Mark. But those words caused him to hesitate. He turned, his gaze narrowing, accustomed to dissecting complex data points and identifying anomalies. And Sarah, still pleading with the busboy, became that anomaly. He saw her then, standing under the harsh glare of the alley light. Her face was smudged, her hair a tangled mess, and her clothes, though clean, hung loosely on her frame, betraying a thinness that spoke of sustained deprivation. But it was her eyes that held him. They weren't the hardened, cynical eyes he sometimes encountered on the streets. They were wide, a startling blue, filled with a raw, almost childlike vulnerability, yet underscored by a fierce maternal protectiveness. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of his own mother, fierce and unyielding when protecting her family. The busboy, a young man with kind eyes, was looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he was saying, his voice low. "I'm not allowed to. Health regulations. We have to throw everything out." Sarah's shoulders slumped further, the last vestiges of hope draining from her. The busboy gestured apologetically towards the overflowing bin. It was in that moment, as Sarah's gaze fell, defeated, that Robert took a few steps closer. He wasn't sure why. It was an impulse, a crack in his otherwise impenetrable facade of corporate composure. He saw the plate, still untouched in the busboy's hand, the prime rib glistening under the artificial light. He had ordered it, taken 2 bites, and then been called away for an urgent phone call. He had simply forgotten about it, a testament to his comfortable indifference. "Excuse me." Robert's voice was calm, authoritative, cutting through the busboy's apologies. Both Sarah and the busboy turned, startled. Robert, impeccably dressed, a silent testament to his status, seemed to radiate an aura of power. The busboy immediately recognized him as a high-value patron, someone who often dined there, someone who commanded respect. "Mr. Maxwell," the busboy stammered, his eyes darting between Robert and Sarah, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Robert didn't acknowledge him directly. His gaze was still fixed on Sarah. He saw the flinch in her eyes, the instinctive desire to disappear, to become invisible. He saw the rapid rise and fall of her chest, the struggle for composure. "Is that your plate?" he asked the busboy, gesturing to the prime rib. "Yes, sir, but it was from your table. I was just about to—" "Then it's my property until it's in the bin, isn't it?" Robert interjected smoothly. The busboy, flustered, nodded, unable to argue with the logic of a man who dealt in far more complex legalities. Robert then turned his gaze back to Sarah, his expression unreadable. "You wanted this for your child?" Sarah swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The sudden attention from a man like him, from his world, was disorienting, terrifying. She expected judgment, disdain, perhaps even a brusque dismissal. "Yes, sir," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes still holding that desperate maternal fire. He's hungry." Robert considered her for a moment longer. The cold wind continued to whip around them, carrying the distant wail of a siren, the muted roar of city traffic. He extended his hand towards the busboy. "Give it to her." The busboy, clearly relieved to be out of the moral quandary, quickly handed the plate to Sarah. She took it, her hands trembling, the warmth of the ceramic a sudden, startling sensation against her cold skin. The smell of the food, so tantalizing moments ago, now felt overwhelming, almost too much to bear. She clutched it to her chest as if it were pure gold. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, her eyes, those striking blue eyes, finally meeting his directly. In that brief, intense moment, Robert saw something flicker within their depths. Not just gratitude, but a profound weariness, a deep-seated pain that resonated even with his compartmentalized existence. It was a glimpse into a world far removed from his own, a stark reminder of the fragile line between abundance and destitution. He watched as she quickly turned, almost fled, back towards the shadows of the alley where Leo was waiting. She knelt beside her son, her hands carefully presenting the plate. Leo's eyes, previously dull with hunger, lit up with a spark that ignited something unexpected within Robert. A child's joy, even over a discarded meal, was a powerful, uncomplicated thing. He saw her tear a piece of the tender meat, pressing it into Leo's hand, who devoured it with a speed that spoke volumes. Robert stood there for a few more seconds, the cold wind now less of an irritant, more of a silent observer. His driver, Mark, had discreetly moved closer, sensing the shift in his employer's mood. "Everything all right, Mr. Maxwell?" Mark asked, his voice low. Robert finally turned, a subtle frown creasing his brow. "Yes, Mark. Just a moment." He walked towards the car, but the usual rush of satisfaction from his business deal was muted, replaced by a lingering image of Sarah's eyes and the desperate joy on Leo's face. The comfortable distance he usually maintained between himself and such realities had been breached. He hadn't just given a plate of food, he had, for a fleeting moment, truly seen. And seeing, for a man like Robert Maxwell, was the first step towards an understanding that could reshape more than just a single evening. The intricate web of his perfectly ordered life had just caught a single, unexpected thread. The warmth of the car's interior was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside, but for Robert, the chill seemed to have seeped into his bones, a feeling he couldn't shake. Mark, his driver, navigated the bustling city streets with practiced ease, but Robert was unusually silent, his gaze fixed on the passing cityscape, yet seeing little of it. The image of Sarah clutching that plate of food, her eyes a desperate blue, played on a loop in his mind. He was a master of analytics, of identifying patterns and predicting outcomes. But this encounter defied easy categorization. It wasn't about numbers or market trends. It was raw, human, and deeply unsettling. He had seen hunger before in documentaries, in news reports, but never with such immediate personal impact. The small, quick movements of Leo, devouring the prime rib, were etched into his memory. Back in his penthouse apartment, a sanctuary of minimalist design and breathtaking city views, Robert poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid glinting under the soft lighting. He usually unwound by reviewing financial reports or reading dense economic treatises. Tonight, however, the familiar comfort of routine felt hollow. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the intricate tapestry of city lights, the same lights that had seemed to mock Sarah just hours before. He thought of his own childhood, comfortable, privileged, yet devoid of the constant presence of his often absent workaholic father. His mother had been the grounding force, a woman of quiet strength and unwavering kindness. He remembered her insistence on gratitude, on never wasting food, a stark echo in his mind as he pictured that discarded plate. He had spent his entire adult life building an empire, driven by a relentless pursuit of control and success, convinced that these were the pillars of security. But what about Sarah and Leo? What kind of security did they have? The questions gnawed at him. He knew, intellectually, that homelessness was a complex societal issue. He funded programs, his company donated to urban aid organizations, but the face-to-face encounter had bypassed his intellect and pricked something deeper. It wasn't pity he felt, not exactly. It was more akin to a profound sense of discomfort, a disturbance in the carefully constructed order of his world. The next morning the discomfort lingered. He arrived at his office, the highest floor of a gleaming glass tower, earlier than usual. His executive assistant, Brenda, a woman of formidable efficiency, greeted him with her usual cheerful deference. "Good morning, Mr. Maxwell. Your 9 a.m. is rescheduled for 10, and I've compiled those Q3 reports you requested." "Thank you, Brenda," Robert said, his voice a little distracted. He went into his office, the panoramic view of the city spread out before him. But his eyes weren't on the distant horizon of opportunity. They were drawn to the areas below, the network of streets where Sarah and Leo might still be. He tried to focus on the Q3 reports, the intricate dance of profits and losses, but his mind kept wandering. He saw Sarah's eyes, heard her desperate plea. He realized he didn't even know her name, or the child's. They were just the homeless woman and the child, abstractions until last night. Now they had faces, a voice. Mid-morning, during a coffee break, he found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, looking out of his window, not at the overall landscape, but trying to zoom in, to imagine the lives unfolding far below. He considered calling Mark, asking him if he remembered the location of the alley, if he had seen them again. But what would he even do? Offer money? Food? It felt trite, a superficial solution to a profound problem. He was a strategic thinker. He craved solutions, not temporary fixes. The memory of the prime rib, a meal he had barely touched, stirred a peculiar shame within him. The stark contrast between his abundance and their deprivation was suddenly glaring, impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about charity, it was about the fundamental imbalance, the chasm that separated their realities. That evening, instead of going straight home, Robert instructed Mark to take a different route, one that would pass by the alley behind the Gilded Fork. It was an illogical detour, driven by an unnamed compulsion. He told himself it was curiosity, a need to see if the anomaly was still there, if the disruption to his perfectly balanced equation still existed. As the car approached the alley, Mark slowed down. The streetlights cast long shadows. The alley was empty. No Sarah, no Leo. Their strange mix of relief and disappointment washed over Robert. Relief, because the uncomfortable reminder was gone. Disappointment, because he suddenly felt a peculiar void, a sense that something unresolved still lingered. "Nothing, sir," Mark said, sensing Robert's unspoken question. "No," Robert replied, his voice almost a whisper. He realized then that he had almost hoped to see them, to somehow rectify the imbalance, to complete the interaction that had been so abruptly cut short. He found himself wishing he had asked her name, asked if there was anything else she needed. He, Robert Maxwell, a man who prided himself on efficiency and decisive action, had been caught off guard. The city continued its relentless hum, indifferent to the quiet storm brewing within Robert. He knew with a certainty that was both unsettling and profound that this wasn't just a fleeting encounter. The image of Sarah's eyes, the desperation tempered by a mother's fierce love, had planted a seed in his carefully cultivated, ordered world. And that seed, he suspected, was about to blossom into something he couldn't predict, something that would demand more than just a discarded plate of prime rib. He had been given a glimpse behind the veil, and the weight of that unseen life was beginning to settle on his shoulders. The following days were a study in cognitive dissonance for Robert Maxwell. He attended high-level meetings, negotiated complex contracts, and analyzed market trends with his usual sharp intellect. Yet, beneath the veneer of corporate efficiency, his mind kept circling back to the alley, to Sarah and Leo. He found himself scanning crowds on his commute, searching for that familiar, desperate blue gaze, for the small blonde head of the child. It was an almost involuntary act, a testament to the imprint the encounter had left on him. His usual workaholic focus was subtly fractured. During calls, he'd stare out his office window, contemplating the intricate grid of the city, wondering where they were now. He felt a peculiar blend of frustration and responsibility. Frustration, because he couldn't simply fix this. Responsibility, because he had seen it, truly seen it, and now it was undeniably a part of his consciousness. He finally decided to act, not out of charity in the traditional sense, but out of a need for resolution, for understanding. Robert didn't do things haphazardly. He approached this like he would a new business venture, with research and a clear objective. His objective was to find them. He called Mark into his office late one afternoon. "Mark, do you remember the exact location of that alley behind the Gilded Fork?" Mark, ever discreet, nodded. "Yes, Mr. Maxwell. Just off Michigan Avenue." "Good. I need you to do something for me. It's unconventional." Robert paused, choosing his words carefully. He wasn't accustomed to explaining his personal impulses, especially not to his staff. "I need you to drive through that area at various times for the next few days. Keep an eye out for that woman and her child. If you see them, don't approach them. Just note their location, what they're doing, and where they seem to be heading." Mark, a man who had worked for Robert for 15 years, maintained a neutral expression, but his eyebrows subtly raised. This was certainly outside his usual duties of executive transportation and logistical support. "Understood, Mr. Maxwell. Should I report back if I see anything?" "Yes, immediately. And keep this to yourself, Mark. This is a personal matter." "Of course, sir." Mark left, and Robert felt a peculiar mix of anticipation and trepidation. He was stepping outside his carefully constructed world, venturing into something entirely unknown. For the next 3 days, Mark conducted his surveillance. Robert felt a strange tension. Each time his phone buzzed, he half expected it to be Mark with news, but the reports were consistently negative. "Nothing today, Mr. Maxwell. Alley empty. Checked a few nearby park benches. Nothing." The lack of success only intensified Robert's determination. He knew how fleeting and transient the lives of the homeless could be. They moved, they adapted, they disappeared. He realized he needed more systematic data. He called Brenda into his office. "Brenda, I need you to discreetly gather some information for me. I'm looking for statistics on homelessness in this city, specifically families with young children. Also, a list of reputable shelters, soup kitchens, and social service organizations that cater to this demographic. Focus on those operating in the downtown and near North Side areas." Brenda, a master of discretion and data retrieval, merely nodded. "Right away, Mr. Maxwell. Is there a particular project this is for?" "Just research, Brenda. Market research, in a way." He offered a slight enigmatic smile. Brenda, accustomed to his often unconventional market research, didn't press further. Within hours, Brenda had compiled an impressive dossier. Robert spent the evening poring over it, a stark contrast to his usual leisure reading. He learned about the scarcity of family shelters, the overwhelming demand, the complex web of reasons that led families to the streets. He read about hidden homelessness, families living in cars or rotating between the goodwill of friends. The data painted a grim, complex picture, far more intricate than the simple, one-dimensional image he had carried in his mind. He realized the futility of just looking. He needed to understand the ecosystem. He made a list of the most prominent shelters and soup kitchens in the areas Mark was canvassing. The next morning, he had another conversation with Mark. "Mark, I need you to expand your search. Drive past these locations," he said, handing him the printed list. "Observe, see if you notice anything, any patterns. And if you see them," he emphasized, "report back immediately." Mark, understanding the unspoken urgency in Robert's voice, took the list without question. "Will do, Mr. Maxwell." It was 2 days later, just as Robert was concluding a tense conference call, that his private line rang. It was Mark. "Mr. Maxwell," Mark's voice was low, slightly hushed. "I think I found them." Robert felt a sudden jolt, a surge of adrenaline. "Where? Are you sure?" "Pretty sure, sir. They're at the Haven of Hope soup kitchen on the north side. The woman with the blue eyes and the little boy. They just came out. They're walking south towards the park." "Don't approach them," Robert reiterated, his voice firm. "Just follow at a distance. Let me know which direction they take. I'm on my way." Robert ended the call, his heart thrumming with an unfamiliar mix of anxiety and purpose. He grabbed his coat, striding out of his office. Brenda looked up, surprised by his sudden departure. "Everything all right, Mr. Maxwell?" "Something's come up, Brenda. I'll be back later. Cancel my 3 p.m. He didn't wait for the elevator, taking the stairs 2 at a time, a raw energy coursing through him. The logical, analytical CFO was momentarily overshadowed by something far more primal. He was going to find them. He was going to understand. His unconventional investigation was about to shift from observation to direct engagement, and he had no idea what he would find when he finally pulled back the veil completely. The abstract concept of homelessness was about to become undeniably intimately real. Robert directed Mark to park a few blocks away from where Sarah and Leo were last seen, near a small, somewhat dilapidated park. He got out of the car, adjusting his expensive suit jacket, suddenly feeling conspicuously out of place. The polished leather of his shoes felt wrong on the cracked pavement. This wasn't his world, and for the first time in a long time, Robert Maxwell felt a profound sense of awkwardness, almost vulnerability. He spotted them quickly. Sarah and Leo were sitting on a park bench, sharing a small brown bag that presumably held the meal they had received from the soup kitchen. Leo was meticulously picking out pieces of bread, offering them to his mother with a solemnity that belied his age. Sarah, in turn, was watching him, a soft, weary smile on her face, but her eyes held a distant, worried gaze, scanning the surroundings as if constantly assessing threats. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, painting the scene with a poignant beauty. Robert approached slowly, deliberately. He didn't want to startle them. He cleared his throat when he was about 10 feet away. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes immediately finding him. Recognition flickered, then suspicion, then a flicker of fear. She instinctively pulled Leo closer, shielding him slightly with her body. "Hello?" Robert said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, stripped of its usual corporate edge. He stopped a respectful distance away. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Sarah's grip on Leo tightened. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low, wary, a protective mother wolf. "My name is Robert Maxwell," he began, taking another slow step closer. We met a few nights ago in the alley." He gestured vaguely, trying to put her at ease, though he wasn't sure how. Sarah remembered. The man in the expensive suit, the man who had ordered the busboy to give her his leftovers. Her mind raced. Why was he here? Was he going to demand something? Was he mocking her? The city had taught her to be suspicious of unsolicited kindness. "I remember," she said, her voice still guarded. "Thank you for the food. My son. He really appreciated it." She didn't offer her name. "You're welcome." Robert paused, searching for the right words. This was far more difficult than a boardroom negotiation. I was concerned. I saw you and your son, and I've been thinking about that night." Sarah stared at him, her blue eyes wide, trying to decipher his intentions. Was this a trick, a prelude to some unwanted proposition? The city was full of dangers, and she had to be constantly vigilant for Leo. "Look, Mr. Maxwell," she said, her voice firming slightly. "We're fine, we don't need anything." It was a lie a desperate attempt to maintain what little dignity she had left. Robert could see right through it. He saw the tremor in her hands, the way Leo clung to her, the worn-out shoes, the thin coats. "I don't believe that," he said gently, directly. "And I don't mean to offend you, but I can see you're not fine. I want to understand. If there's anything I can do to help." Sarah scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. "Help? What kind of help are you talking about? A meal, a few dollars? That's not help when you live like this." Her gaze swept across the park, the discarded wrappers, the struggling trees, the distant gleaming towers that housed people like him. "You don't understand what this life is like." "You're right," Robert admitted, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "I don't, not truly. That's why I'm here. I want to understand." He took another step, closing the distance slightly. "My company, we do a lot of philanthropic work, but it's usually from a distance. I realized that night that I was missing something, the human element." He knelt down, bringing himself closer to Leo's eye level, though his gaze remained on Sarah. Leo, who had been hiding behind his mother, peered out, his eyes curious, no longer fearful. "What's your name?" Robert asked Leo, a gentle smile on his face. "Leo," the boy mumbled shyly. "Hello, Leo, my name is Robert." He offered a small, reassuring nod. Then he looked back at Sarah. "Please, tell me what happened. How did you and Leo end up here?" He knew it was a profoundly personal question, an invasion of privacy, but he felt a strange, compelling need to know, to connect the dots. Sarah hesitated. Her entire life, she had built walls, kept her struggles to herself. Sharing her story felt like ripping open a fresh wound, but there was something in Robert's eyes, a genuine concern she hadn't expected, a quiet persistence that wasn't demanding, but simply present. The unspoken plea in her own heart, a cry for help she dared not voice, resonated with his unexpected presence. She looked at Leo, then back at Robert. The weight of her secret, the burden of her past, had been crushing her. Perhaps, just perhaps, this man, from his impenetrable world of power and privilege, could offer a path she hadn't seen. "It's a long story," she began, her voice still hoarse but a fraction softer, a hint of the dam beginning to crack. "It wasn't always like this. We had a home, a life. Then, things fell apart." She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. The wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves on the ground, mirroring the turmoil within her. "My husband. He got sick. A rare, aggressive cancer. We spent everything on his treatments, every penny. We lost our jobs, our savings. Then he passed away." Her voice broke, a raw, painful sound that tugged at something deep within Robert. "After he was gone, the medical bills were astronomical. We couldn't keep the apartment. I tried everything. Work. But without childcare, without a safety net. It was a spiral. No family. No one left." She looked up at him again, her eyes glistening. "We've been on the streets for 6 months now." The raw honesty of her confession hung in the cold air. Robert listened, his corporate mind quiet for once, replaced by a profound empathy he rarely allowed himself to feel. This wasn't just a statistic. This was Sarah and Leo, a family shattered by tragedy and abandoned by a system that offered little mercy. The unspoken plea now voiced was a heavy burden, a testament to the fragile line between stability and utter ruin. Robert knew with absolute clarity that his unconventional investigation was no longer about curiosity. It was about connection, about healing, and about a responsibility he was only just beginning to comprehend. The fairy tale, if it was to be one, had just found its first incredibly difficult chapter. Robert listened in silence as Sarah recounted her story. The details were stark, brutal in their simplicity: illness, debt, loss, and the relentless downward spiral into homelessness. He heard the tremor in her voice as she spoke of her husband, the quiet despair when she described the medical bills that had swallowed their lives whole. The raw vulnerability she displayed was a stark contrast to the guarded, efficient world he inhabited. He found himself, for the first time, not just observing but truly absorbing the weight of another person's suffering. It wasn't a theoretical concept from a charity report. It was the tangible pain in Sarah's eyes, the quiet strength she still possessed despite everything, and the innocent dependence of Leo, who now watched him with an unblinking, curious gaze. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," Robert finally said, his voice quiet, sincere. He hadn't used her name before. Saying it felt like acknowledging a deeper connection, stepping further across the invisible line that separated their worlds. That's an unimaginable burden." Sarah merely nodded, her gaze drifting to Leo, who had finished his meal and was now meticulously lining up small pebbles on the bench. "It is what it is," she whispered, a resignation in her tone that broke Robert's heart. She had become accustomed to the unimaginable. "It doesn't have to be," Robert stated, his executive resolve beginning to reassert itself, though now channeled into a new purpose. "Sarah, I want to help you, truly help, not just with a meal but with a path forward." Sarah looked at him, her eyes clouded with skepticism. "Why?" she asked, the single word laden with years of disappointment and broken promises. "Why would you?" Robert paused, considering her question. It was a valid one. "Because," he began, searching for the honest answer, "because I saw you, and your son, and it made me realize how easy it is to become disconnected, to forget the human cost behind the numbers. My company is successful, I am successful, and with that comes a responsibility I haven't fully embraced until now." He looked at her directly. "I want to help you get back on your feet, for you and for Leo," he continued, laying out his thoughts, drawing on his strategic planning skills. "I can help you find a temporary place to stay, a safe, warm environment. We can look into resources for your son, maybe a school, get him back into a routine. And for you, we can explore job opportunities, perhaps even training. I have connections, I have resources." He was speaking with the same quiet confidence he used in a boardroom, but the stakes here felt infinitely higher. Sarah listened, her expression unreadable. She had heard promises before, empty words from well-meaning people who quickly disappeared. But there was something different about Robert. His persistence, his calm demeanor, the genuine, if somewhat awkward, sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't offering a handout, he was offering a plan. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice still wary. "People like you don't just help people like me without expecting something in return." Robert met her gaze evenly. "The catch, Sarah, is that I want to see you and Leo thrive. I want to see you safe and stable. And perhaps," he admitted, a rare flicker of introspection in his eyes, "it's also for me, a way to reconcile with a part of my own life that I've neglected, to use my resources for something beyond profit margins." Leo, sensing the shift in the conversation, the easing of tension, quietly took his mother's hand. Sarah looked at her son, then back at Robert. The idea of a warm bed, of regular food, of a future for Leo was almost too much to comprehend. It was a lifeline she hadn't dared to dream of. "A temporary place," she repeated, testing the words. "And a job." "Yes," Robert affirmed. The transition from the cold, unforgiving pavement to the sterile but warm walls of a transitional housing facility was disorienting for Sarah. Robert had moved with corporate precision. Within 48 hours of their conversation in the park, he had leveraged his influence with a non-profit his company funded. He didn't just write a check. He made calls. He ensured Sarah and Leo were placed in a high-security, family-oriented residence on the edge of Lincoln Park, far from the shadows of the Gilded Fork Alley. For the first few days, Sarah lived in a state of constant hypervigilance. She would wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced she was back on the street, clutching Leo to her chest. The silence of a private room was louder than the city traffic she had grown used to. But then she would feel the softness of the clean sheets and the rhythmic, peaceful breathing of her son, who was finally sleeping without shivering. Robert visited them on the 4th day. He didn't come in his limousine. He took a standard car, and arrived with a simple backpack for Leo filled with new books and school supplies. He looked out of place in the modest common room, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the worn sofas, but his demeanor had shifted. The stiffness in his shoulders had begun to melt. "How are you settling in?" Robert asked, sitting on a wooden chair across from her. Sarah looked at her hands. They were cleaner now, the grime of the streets scrubbed away, but the scars of the last 6 months were still visible in the way she carried herself. "Leo is happy. He had a glass of milk this morning, real milk. He hasn't stopped talking about the magic fridge that always has food." She looked up, her blue eyes meeting his. "It feels like a dream, Robert, and I'm terrified I'm going to wake up." "It's not a dream," Robert said firmly. "It's a foundation, but a foundation needs a structure. I've been looking into your professional background, Sarah. You were an administrative coordinator before your husband got sick. Your references, the ones I could track down, spoke very highly of your organizational skills." "That was a lifetime ago," she sighed. "I don't even have a resume anymore. I don't have a phone. I don't have dignity." "Dignity isn't something you lose, it's something others fail to see," Robert countered. He pulled a folder from his bag. "I've arranged for you to meet with a career counselor who specializes in re-entry. And once you're ready, there's a junior administrative position opening at one of our subsidiary logistics firms. It's not a handout. You'll have to interview. You'll have to prove you can do the work. But the door is open." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. It wasn't just the offer of a job. It was the fact that he expected her to earn it. He was treating her like a professional, not a charity case. For the first time in months, the homeless mom label began to peel away, revealing the capable woman underneath. Recovery was not a straight line. As Sarah began her job training, the survival mode of the streets lingered as a shadow of anxiety. The crisis peaked in the 2nd month when Leo developed a severe fever. Paralyzed by the trauma of past medical debts and the fear that social services would take her son, Sarah called Robert in a panic. Robert abandoned a high-stakes board meeting instantly. "You are under my protection," he assured her, sending a private doctor to the shelter. This gesture provided Sarah with something more valuable than money, an emotional shield. That evening, as Leo recovered, Robert confessed that helping them had filled a void in his own sterile corporate life. He admitted he had been a ghost who looked through people until he met her. They sat in the dim light, two souls from opposite worlds finding common ground in the difficult work of healing. The day of the final hurdle arrived. Dressed in a professional suit and clutching a leather portfolio, Sarah entered a glass and steel skyscraper, the kind of place that once made her feel invisible. The interview with Mr. Henderson was grueling. He questioned her long absence from the workforce. Sarah didn't falter. She translated her struggle for survival into corporate efficiency, explaining that she knew how to manage resources under extreme pressure. "I know the value of a second chance," she told him. "You won't find anyone more dedicated, because I know exactly what it's like to have nothing." Outside, Robert was waiting on the sidewalk. When she told him she had been honest, he smiled. She wasn't shivering anymore. She was ready to start her new life on Monday. 1 year later, the Chicago winter felt different. Sarah watched the snow from the window of her own 2-bedroom apartment. The smell of a pot roast filled the air, a meal she had earned and prepared herself. When a knock came, Leo ran to the door, shouting for Uncle Robert. Robert entered, looking younger and more at peace, having dedicated much of his career to a new housing initiative for homeless families. He presented Sarah with a framed photo of the city at sunset, once a place of despair, now a land of opportunity. "I only provided the light," Robert said as they sat for dinner. "You walked out of the shadows." There were no magic wands in their story, only the profound power of being seen. As the city lights twinkled outside, they sat together, healed from poverty of the body and poverty of the soul.